at 19, you landed in Iowa.
Right.
Rural Iowa for Grinnell College as a freshman. How is that? There's a Call of Duty Karachi. There's not a Call of Duty Grinnell. Although maybe there should be.
It would be very easy. There's not many places to hide. It would just be flat, no trees. People are always like, why did you go to Iowa? And for me, growing up, I really have a sense of how big America was. I knew America from movies and TV shows, and it's all New York or LA, and I'm like, oh, okay, so it's all sort of this. And then I landed in Iowa, and I was like, where are the buildings? And then I was driven to Grinnell, which is a town of 9,000 people, and I was like, where is anything? Everything is gone. You don't really get to see that part of the country very much. It was just corn and pigs, you know? And we have corn in Pakistan. We don't have the other thing.
So you went back recently and gave a commencement address.
I did.
Some of the takeaways from which were have sex with an immigrant.
Yeah, I would say that was the main takeaway. Because they were like, you have to give advice. And I was like, I don't have any advice, except, you know, we're in a tough time. Fucking immigrant. We'll put in the work. It's going to be great for our morale. Things are tough. Times are tough right now. And, you know, help us out. We'll help you out. That was, I'd say, the only concrete takeaway that I had in my speech, because I don't know what advice I would have, you know.
I would imagine that was like from Karachi to Iowa to like suddenly entering the comedy world. It must have been sort of like getting there and trying to figure out what it is you were going to do would be as hard as it is for any comedian starting in a city, but like also just, yeah.
I mean, I think starting comedy for anybody is really hard. Mm-hmm. It's very intimidating, you know. I started in Chicago, and I don't think me going from Pakistan to Iowa to Chicago made it any harder or any easier than it did for anybody else.
Eventually, your comedy did shift to being more personal and like drawing more on your sort of like life experience. You've said in the past, somehow like post 9/11, it seemed more important to like be talking about like how a normal Muslim lives his life.
I started actually not too long after 9/11, and I don't know if you remember or if you were sort of following the comedy scene then, but there were a lot of comedians right then who were sort of mostly male brown guys who were doing comedy, and they were sort of talking about being Muslim and stuff. And at the time, I said that there's too many of, like, they're all sort of, you know, dipping into the same pool. So I figured, I decided I wouldn't talk about that because I was like, I'll be more like the comedians that I really enjoyed, which was, you know, at the time it was Seinfeld and stuff, you know. So I was like, I'll do that. And then I've been doing it for 5 or 6 years, and I was like, there's a big part of me that once I started talking about Star Trek and other stuff I like.
Gateway jokes.
Yes, you know, that old saying, Star Trek jokes are gateway to Muslim jokes. I think Tchaikovsky said that. I don't know. What a terrible. That was the
man of many words.
I was like, yes, I'll say a smart name. And so I was like, if I want to talk about personal stuff and talk about my experience, there's a big part of who I am that I'm not talking about on stage that I have decided to cordon off as like stuff that I would talk about. So then I decided, like, you know, I can talk about being from Pakistan, and I can talk about my ethnicity and my identity as long as it's in a way that's very personal to myself. And I felt like as long as I'm not like trying to play to stereotypes, and as long as I'm really talking about my experience, I can trust that it'll be unique and it won't be like hack or anything.
So Silicon Valley is sort of interesting because it's a show, and especially like in relation to the character of Dinesh, that doesn't tiptoe around the question of like race and racism.
You know, I think sometimes depicting people make the mistake of hearing what a character says and think that that's what the movie or TV show is saying, when that's not true. You know, like, you have to be able to show people being awful and racist and understand that that's not the perspective of the show, you know? That tech world, I've talked to so many, like, Indian, Pakistani people in the tech world who are like, that's so accurate. They hear racially insensitive jokes all the time. They hear them all the time. And I think depicting that is I think it's a very interesting way of shining a light on that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you've had some racist hecklers in the past, which is something that comes up in the movie The Big Sick. Have they sort of evolved over the time that you have been in the business? You
know, their references get updated.
Sure.
So it used to be, you know, Taliban, and now it's ISIS. So they keep abreast of...
They're hip to the times.
Yeah. I remember one time I was opening for Todd Barry in Milwaukee, and that was one of the first times someone said something racist to me, and then Todd went up on stage after me and really ripped on that person. And I was like, oh my God, that's fantastic. That's what I should have done. I was like, how do you have such great comebacks for racists? Nobody's ever racist to you. And so after it happened 2 or 3 times, I was like, I should have a line, because you're so thrown. You know, when someone's racist to you, I'm a grown man, it still makes you feel bad. Even if you understand that the problem is theirs, they're the ones who are bad. It still flattens you, and you feel reduced. And so I decided, like, I would have, like, a comeback line that I would just, like, recite back, and I didn't have to have my wits about me or anything. I didn't have to be quick or anything. If someone said something racist to me, I would say these 3 lines back, and it would kill, because the audience just wanted you to do something to shut this person down. And that's the line that's in the movie. In The Big Sick, I say one of the lines that I'd written, and there were like 3 or 4 in a row that I sort of had.
What's the line from The Big Sick?
So in the movie, you know, he says, go back to ISIS, and my line was, I would say, that's right, I am a terrorist, I just do stand-up comedy on the side to keep a low profile. And that's what I used in the movie. But then I would say, you know, the stand-up comedy camp is actually right next to the terrorist camp. There's very talented people on both sides. And then I also heard once, this was before, this will date, when, you know, they were like, where's Osama? One guy yelled that out to me. And that one, in the moment, I was like, I don't know, he hasn't texted me in a while. He's not, our group chat, he's been really absent. Maybe he doesn't have good Wi-Fi where he is. That's a clue. But this was before, you know, before Zero Dark 30.
I'm being signaled that we need to end. But thank you so much for chatting with me tonight.
Oh, thanks for having me. Thank you.
Thank you guys for coming out.